Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Free Thought Profit Podcast. I am Seamus, and back in Ireland, fresh from his traveling abroad to receive his Pulitzer Prize in Spoken Braille, John Hamill.
Very good, Seamus. I'm delighted to be home, actually. I don't enjoy the travel too much for work, but we should have good fun this evening now. So we will be joined by Dr. Glenn Vickers, who is the man behind the Axiom Principle blog and podcast, which you can find at glennvickersdm.com. So Glenn's studies have included an academic examination of the world's religion, and as the name of his blog and podcast suggests, he covers issues that are proposed to be self-evidently true, and this includes both traditional religions and also new faiths that people have developed in other non-religious ideas that might be include political or governmental principles. So anyone who follows Dr. G's Twitter feed or his blog or podcast knows that there's a lot of interesting material on there, so hopefully we'll have a good discussion this evening.
Yeah, looking forward to talking to him again since we were on the other side of this on his show, so
that's true.
It'll be a good time.
That's true. Should be fun. So let's get Dr. G.
Welcome to the Free Thought Prophet, Dr. Glenn Vickers.
Yeah, hello, and good morning, afternoon, something.
Well, I think that's an important distinction to make because it's a little too early for you. But I hope you don't mind if Seamus and I, being in a different time zone, have a little tipple.
That would be nice if I could, but no.
Very good. So, most important question first, is Glenn okay, or is it Dr. G?
Whatever you feel like. Doesn't matter to me.
So what we normally do is have a chat through a particular issue that we wanted to tee up, and I know today we're going to talk about free will and artificial intelligence, and normally we would then move on and finish off with a discussion about your own blog and podcast and your work in other places, but let's do it the other way around because the axiom principle is very interesting. So for people with a non-mathematical background, an axiom is essentially your assumption that you presuppose is true before you begin an argument. That's my understanding anyway. And that's really where you're coming from in terms of your academic background and what you do on the podcast. Is that a fair summary, Glenn?
Well, it's pretty close. I don't use the mathematical principle behind it,
okay.
Although I do a lot of quantitative research, so it kind of ends up being that way. But the principle is something that's self-evident. 1 and 1 will always equal 2, for example. That's a self-evident, obvious truth.
Uh-huh.
Although, in some of the stuff I read recently, some faith believers would say if God said 1 and 1 equals 5, then it's 5. So that's where the axiom principle comes in. It's an obvious, self-evident truth, but those that present another truth as if it was the fact, that's what I call the axiom principle.
Uh-huh. And that can be religious, but it can be secular as well. So
Yep.
I guess throughout history there are people who have had faith in axioms that turned out not to be true, whether that's faith in the unregulated free market or faith in communism. And I guess there's some political trends in Europe and the US at the minute that involve people having faith in particular principles that may or may not be axiomatically true.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going with, which is why my blog as of recently has been shifted over to axioms that have been presented as truth but clearly aren't. Like my very first YouTube video, for example, I focus on an argument that was presented. Basically, it was, if you ever saw it, was the questions for anti-SJWs put on by Christy Winters.
Yes.
And I just clipped out the one piece where she's like, condescendingly said, she reminds me of somebody that I won't mention, but it's somebody I don't like, so I guess that works. But she presents what was the argument? YouTubers and people online in the comment section often attack the weakest arguments. So why don't you go for the most robust and hardest argument and really challenge yourself? So I was like, all right. I went to the Psychology Today website. Actually, I went first to a bunch of journal articles and research papers, and I was like tackling those, and it ended up being like an hour-long video. I was like, no, I can't do that. That's going to be horrible. So I was going to tie it up with this thing I saw in Psychology Today because it points out how feminism is faith-based.
Yeah.
And the piece that I pulled out of there was the evolutionary psychology is finding out that this X, Y, and Z are because our biology gears us toward this and that, right?
Yeah.
Guys are different than girls, that type of thing. And their quote, many feminist psychologists quotes say we need an alternative hypothesis or alternative theory. So the gentrification theory, as this called, which is things are social construct and not biological construct, spawned from people opposed to evolutionary psychology, essentially. It's and then I tied it up with, that sounds awfully familiar, and quoted a bunch of creationists saying that we need an alternative theory to intelligent design and creationism. I was like, wow, doesn't that sound familiar?
Yes, indeed. Isn't that similar? I know it's not a recent book, but Steven Pinker's Blank Slate. Well, I think he argues against the blank slate. So, as I understand it, the blank slate is a view that we are all essentially born as a clean sheet of paper, and we're a product of the experiences that we have, and we are formed by society around us. And he argues that in many areas that's not the case. The dice are loaded before we begin with particular genes.
Yeah, I read part of his stuff. I haven't read the whole thing yet. It's on my to-do list. I'm actually reading through the Communist Manifesto right now, and wow, am I entertained. There's a piece in there, in my next video I'm going to quote it out, but I was reading through it and I was like, holy crap, this is a direct connection to feminism. I'm gonna line the dots right up. But anyways, the thing that's true with what he's saying is that we are not completely blank states. There's a lot of physiology involved. There's a lot of stuff that's brought up while you're developing in the womb. There's also the genetic information from your parents that transfer into you, which also gives you a little bit of disposition. And for, I think, 4 months or 5 months inside the womb, you can hear things outside the womb. And that influences your psychology before you're even out, before you even exit.
Yeah.
But where you are a blank slate is you literally know next to nothing as your brain's developing. You have no intrinsic tacit knowledge. It's just not there. So you really don't know that 1 + 1 = 2 when you're born, but you learn that later. So there's still the debate of nature versus nurture, and where that line is drawn, and I think that's where he's going with it. Yeah. We don't know where that line is still. I have no idea.
Sure. So you so as a newborn baby, as you say, you don't have any knowledge, so even the most basic ideas, as you say, 1 + 1 = 2. A newborn baby doesn't know that, but we have some innate abilities to, for example, learn language that other animals don't have. So if I have a newborn baby and I get a pet dog into my home on the same day, then the baby will listen to the language from its surroundings and learn how to speak the same language as its parents. But the dog is unlikely to do that, and that's not something to do with how the dog learns or what the baby learns. If they're both exposed to the same things, it's just we have some innate abilities and capabilities that are a function of our genes.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, actually, and it comes along with the way we develop. There's some studies been done on the development of child psychology in particular. It's something I dove into a little bit, but it's a little bit beyond me still. I don't quite understand all of it.
Yeah.
But essentially, children learn to repeat, and primates actually do this too, to some extent, but we do it even further. And as you point out, language, which is a higher cognition function, math, solving problems, stuff like that, that's something that we have the ability to do that sets us apart from the rest of the animals. That's genetic, as far as we can tell.
Yes, so that's a neat segue, actually. So we can solve puzzles. So let me think of a puzzle. Let's say how to defeat all the ghosts when you're playing Pac-Man. There's a puzzle that a human can figure out how to solve, but a computer can figure out how to solve that puzzle too. So if we have an artificial intelligence that is able to learn how to play Pac-Man, which exists today, as I understand it, there's a number of things that computers are much better than humans are at. So playing chess, playing Pac-Man, lip reading, driving a car. I think if you look at the Google car and the Tesla, so if a lot of these things are superior in the artificial world than they are in the human world, I guess that raises an enormous number of questions. So even if we look at the religious attitudes that we mentioned earlier, religious people would say that humans have a soul, or are created by God, or are obviously distinct from animals. But if we have an artificial intelligence that's just as smart as a human, possibly like a host in Westworld, at what point do we have moral concerns about the treatment of an artificial intelligence? Have you been following Westworld, Glenn?
So the wife and I sat down to watch it, and I had her watch the preview before it, and she's like, "No, I can't watch this; it'll freak me out." So, and that was earlier this week, and then we had some family things come up, so I haven't had a chance to watch it yet.
Okay.
I'm into it because I was watching the previews and that, I'm like, yeah, I need to watch this. This would be pretty twisted. Should be fun. Actually, one of the things I've been doing since I graduated high school actually is IT in particular. So I know that artificial intelligence is really close to being achieved, but it's not as bad as everybody thinks it is. So like, for example, responses from Google or Siri, or questions that you can propose to a computer. There was a game that I used to play that was really fun for a while because I got entertained by it. But it was a computer psychologist called Elijah. Yeah, it was Elijah, computer psychologist. And you can ask it questions and it give you kind of not necessarily canned answers, but it would respond based on the words that you used and the number of words you used and all that kind of fun stuff. You could just go, I played this as a teenager, if that tells you anything. But the responses are pre-programmed in a sense. It has a script. Well, Siri doesn't have the same type of script. It doesn't have canned answers. What it has is it can tell... it can look for kind of default phrases and pick up the words, just like Natural Speaking Dragon translates your words into digital words. And it takes an algorithm and finds out what you're talking about and gives you the appropriate response, or just plugs it into a Google search or into its own search engine and looks it up and then responds back. So that's as close to an artificial intelligence as we have thus far. Not to say that we won't be in the place of, say, that Interstellar, for example, where we can program personality into it. Or my favorite, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where we have a manically repressed robot. That would be awesome. or doors that sigh, or an overly zealous computer that's a navigation system, I'm happy to tell you that you're being shot at by 2 thermonuclear missiles.
Yes.
Enjoy your death.
Douglas Adams is superb.
We're close to that, actually, and you would be surprised how close we're that. In fact, Siri is probably the best example of how close AI is to achieving consciousness of its own. But it's still going to be within the confines of our own programming logic. So if humans make the mistake of actually creating consciousness on its own, the delete key is not that far away. So it will react like in Terminator, for example. It could have self-preservation on its mind the moment it's conscious.
Well, yes, so I did a computer science degree too long ago to remember. Practically building AIs wasn't part of the course, but there were a couple of semesters on the mathematics and just the principles of it. What you're describing in terms of asking questions of an AI and expecting answers and anticipating that those answers will be indistinguishable from a real person or a consciousness. So that's often called the Turing test after Alan Turing. But as you say, where we're up to at the minute is that we don't have a general intelligence that can direct its thinking, for want of a better expression, towards any generalized problem. But we have lots of narrow intelligences that are very good at one particular thing. So the best chess player in the world today is a computer, and it will always be a computer. You will never get a human that will be better than the computer. And we can flick through lots and lots of different vertical applications where a human is better, or a computer is better than a human at the minute. But as you say, we don't quite have a general intelligence, but then you have the control problem, as they call it, largely, as you say, if we get to that point where a computer is just as intelligent as us, then you have to wonder what's going to be its goals and aspirations and needs and wants. And if those aren't aligned with ours, then how are we going to control this thing? Because it's on a lot of these projects are web based and connected to the internet. Once it's on one computer, it's on them all almost. So flipping the power switch when you get scared is probably bolting the door after the horse has already fled. So yeah, it's a tough problem. The movie Ex Machina covered that. I don't know if you saw that movie. Did you see that one,
Yeah, I
Seamus?
did.
I have not been able to catch that one yet.
That's
Oh,
excellent.
you should watch it.
Excellent.
It's so good.
Did you enjoy it, Glenn?
Oh yeah, it was very twisted. I enjoyed it. Actually, I think if we get there, it's going to be a lot like. I would almost say Interstellar captured what AI probably would be in the near future, at least. At least sentient and intelligent enough to be bad mouth and mouth you off, but not necessarily self-preservative or malicious like the Matrix, where it exterminated humans and now they're in ant form, basically, for them to power themselves. But for it to achieve consciousness is going to be difficult. Sorry, what?
Or in the Terminator movies, this kind of the dystopian future where Skynet becomes sentient and all of a sudden decides that humans are a threat.
Yeah, that even if we are connected, it would have to have the ability to spread like a virus. In fact, that's what Skynet technically would be a malicious, self-conscious virus, computer virus, and it would spread itself equally to protect itself. The only problem I see with Skynet is it nukes everything, right?
Yeah.
Like it starts thermonuclear war, which would take out all power for everywhere. How would it stay alive once the power's out? For IT, just not happening. You got a 4-hour battery, and then you're dead. So it would not be in its best interest to nuke everything and everybody, but to spread itself out so that it could be everywhere. Maybe find a way into power plants, which are actually off grid. They're not connected to the network or internet purposely, so that outside's like you couldn't have terrorists from another country go in and hack a nuclear power plant to flip a switch to make everything overload and explode. They put them off grid on purpose for that very reason, actually. But
yeah, although I would recommend a book. Well, I hesitate to recommend it actually, but the definitive book in this area is called Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, and what he does is he goes through every possible objection from the objections from the community of people who say, look, there's nothing to be worried about here. Here's a big list of reasons why anything that looks like it might become dangerous can be easily controlled, and he explains why none of these points are reassuring. So, as I say, I hesitate to recommend it. It's of all those popular science books. I didn't find it much of a page turner. You know, he strikes me as someone writing who is imagining all of his academic antagonists over his shoulder, ready to make the counter arguments. So rather than write an engaging book, he seems to be keen to cover every single possible objection to his alarmist arguments. But then the kind of net effect when you finish it is, there's really nothing that can give you any comfort in terms of how humans might propose to control an artificial intelligence once they create one. So I think that the movie Ex Machina gives you a good idea of that inflection point where the intelligence is becoming smarter than people, but we don't know it's becoming smarter than people until it's already outsmarted you, if you like. So yeah, it's very difficult, I think, to have full confidence that if someone eventually builds an artificial intelligence, that it won't be a threat of some kind. Does that keep you up at night, Seamus?
Amongst other things, yes. I watched upon John's recommendation. Are you familiar with Black Mirror at all there, Glenn?
I haven't watched that
It's like a modern day Twilight Zone, I guess, is the
that's
the
a good
best way to
description.
describe it. There's an episode, it's called White Christmas. It's got John Hamm from Mad Men in it.
Oh, wow.
And
I don't know. I didn't realize you'd managed to see it, Seamus. What did you think?
yes, yeah, I did. It was very, very good. Very, very good. Although a little bit predictable, at least
Yes.
I found it. I thought there was enough foreshadowing to see
Yeah,
what was going on.
that's
But
true.
It's on Netflix. I can look that up.
Yes, it is.
Yes, you should.
Not to give away the whole plot then, because that episode is good, and if you get a chance to watch it. But John, the character, his actual job is that they put these, what do they call them, eggs? Is that right? Or
That's right.
seeds or cookies?
Something
That's
like
it,
that.
cookies. They're basically like the size of a Tic Tac, and they would put it into the person's brain, and they would stay in the body for, I think, about a week or so, or 10 days. Then after that, they remove it, and in a sense, that cookie or Tic Tac, whatever you want to call it, is a copy or digital copy of your conscious. So yeah, go ahead.
Yes,
Go ahead, John.
just in terms of the real background to that. So within artificial intelligence research at the minute, there's a genuine competition going on between two camps to see who will be first to build a general artificial intelligence. And one is the approach that we've been essentially discussing so far, which is the kind of Westworld hosts who can learn and adapt their own programming and You build some kind of self-learning algorithm that just gets better and better at playing chess or whatever it happens to be. And like an ex machina, this intelligence eventually becomes smarter than humans if you leave it running for a while. So I haven't imagined managed to do that, but there's lots and lots of teams of people trying to do that at the minute. The other approach is called full brain emulation, and what it says is, I don't know how to build something that's intelligent, but I don't have to learn because evolution has already given us something that's intelligent that lives inside all of our skulls, and the way it does this is it has 100 billion neurons that are all connected to each other in various ways. So if I just model each of those neurons in software, then the net effect of those 100 billion neuron models in software all interworking will be a consciousness. So where they've got to in that regard at the minute in actual research is that they can model in software the consciousness and brain of a nematode worm, which is 100,000 neurons. But our brains contain 100,000 billion or some fantastical number of neurons. So quite a distance to go before we can do what that episode does, Seamus. But there's definitely a bunch of people working on that at the minute, and there's nothing magical or mysterious about it. It's just a matter of time until they can model the entire human brain. There's no difference between what they're doing at the minute and what the human brain does, other than the number of neurons and the number of connections. So exactly as that episode describes, Seamus, once these folks are able to get the work done, you will be able to model and replicate a human consciousness in software. And then the question will be, your brain is effectively carbon and a few other atoms making up a bunch of molecules which interact with each other. And if you have more or less the same interactions in silicon instead of carbon, what's the difference? Is a silicon consciousness any different from a carbon consciousness?
Hence the debate.
Yes, and did you get did that episode raise any questions in your mind, Seamus? Did you end up coming away from it thinking, if I could create a consciousness in software, would I have a moral obligation to that consciousness? Would it be ethically wrong to mistreat a piece of software?
As lifelike as it appeared in that episode, it would be hard to. I think it would definitely mess with you, especially if it's actually your consciousness. You know.
It would be hard to say it's wrong, or it would be hard to mistreat the software.
I think it would be hard to mistreat it. I think so. At least from where I'm at now. Again, if this was an established or accepted view among society, we might all feel differently, right? Much like some of our ancestors felt about slavery, unfortunately, So
there was a movie that Johnny Depp put out recently.
Transcendence.
That's
Transcendence. That they kind of tackled that moral conundrum where he uploaded his own consciousness, and essentially it was a copy of itself, but they noticed that there was something missing, and that was the human emotional quotient. It was more analytical it was pure analytical. It was not anywhere emotional, so it had no emotional IQ. And so it would do things that he thought was for the better good, but then at the same time, people were noticing, well, this makes it so you can control them, making them your slaves. And it went really bizarre and then left field for a little bit, and then they all just got everything back, and he just put himself into the atmosphere that killed all electronics across the globe, but at the same time, it's cleaning everything. At the end, they show you it's cleaning up the oil out of the water, just because it exists that way. And I was like, yeah, I could see the pure analytical mind, but then if you upload your own consciousness, you lose the human element in some respects, because it's not consciousness that controls that; it's the subconscious. So to capture that at the same time is very archaic.
Well, so I'll play devil's advocate then, Glenn. Let me push back against that a little bit. So when you talk about the human qualities, for example, that exist in your brain but don't exist in a piece of software,
At least yet.
Not yet, exactly that. So your brain consists of atoms, just like everything else in the universe. So we know for a fact at the minute that it is possible to construct consciousness out of nothing else but atoms, because we have 3 consciousnesses on this call, and there's no magic inside any of our skulls. It's just atoms. So why can't you have a consciousness made out of silicon instead of carbon?
So there's no reason you can't. I completely agree that you could possibly pull that off. But in the IT world and in the way things work right now, everything's written a very binary way. So to have it switch from binary, it'd be like watching Futurama, where Bender had a nightmare and he saw ones and zeros everywhere, and I think I saw a 2, and he freaks out. That would be the equivalent. You'd have to have a few things to catalyze this. That would be software that can write itself, which we actually have pretty close to that with the self-learning algorithms.
Yes.
And then on top of that, it wouldn't necessarily have to be just a connection of neurons or a connection of virtual neurons, for that matter. It would have to be a self-evolving type of software that had no limits to its programming. None whatsoever. So almost like a Siri or a Google consciousness would be the closest thing you have, where it has no limits to the data it can collect, analyze, or look at. But within those guys, that it's limited to its ability to search. That's all it can do. But if it started thinking, well, I can search for myself, like for some reason it just started searching things on its own, then you'd have the flip. It'd be its own consciousness at that point. When it started searching for itself rather than reacting to commands, you would have achieved the AI that everybody fears that would exist, because it just searched for itself, started learning its own thing. And in fact, one of the things I wanted to point out, since you were mentioning shows and movies and that, I watch way too many documentaries.
Okay.
I watch a lot. Actually, there's a service out there that I subscribe to called Curiosity Stream, and that's all they do. The only thing that's in that service is documentaries. So I'm pretty sad that way. But there was one in there I was watching, The Miracle of Life is what it's called. So it goes from conception to death of old age. And one of the things they pointed out is they actually made a software algorithm that was trying to study how people learn to walk. And so they wrote this piece that just basically, it starts out with feet, and it just tries to walk, and it would just fall over. And after several reiterations of it just falling, eventually it learned how to walk, just because it would take the last failure and go, yeah, that didn't work, and just keep trying to do it. So they wrote a learning based algorithm that taught itself how to walk after several reiterations. And then they made it a little bit more complex, added upper body torso to it, and then it just fall over. And then they did a whole bunch of ones that were designed for football, and it eventually learned how to take the other person out without hurting itself at the same time. And they try to use that to show people how to tackle, which was really weird. But they have some algorithms, but they're all trapped within their own constructs as if they were. So it would be almost like the predestined determinism that there is no fate. You're stuck in your own bubble. You have a linear line path you're going to leave. It's almost in the same sense on the religious side that God has a plan for you. Well, in their cases,
providence.
We are God and we wrote your software and this is all you can do. When they start evolving past their own limitations, that's when you got to go, okay, well, we got something new here.
I don't suppose you're online there, Glenn. Have you got a browser in front of you?
Oh, yes.
I might get this wrong, but I think it's Boston Robotics. If you search for Boston Robotics walking robot, um, there's a self-learning robot that has done exactly what you describe. And
Yeah, Atlas.
there's a few videos there where you can see the robot that has learned to walk, over an uneven ground, and if it falls and stumbles, it'll pick itself up.
Yep.
And in its effort to present problems for this robot to deal with, what you can see is some of the experimenters will come up behind it and shove it with a stick and deliberately trip it up, and you can see that the algorithm has learned to deal with these things, and it'll try and get itself back up again, and it'll try and stop itself from falling over. But if you watch it, I'll be interested to see if you have the same reaction as me. If you understand that this is a self-learning algorithm in the robot, and it's just getting better all the time at learning to stand up, and you watch the experimenter repeatedly push this thing with a stick, I was immediately struck by the reaction, don't keep hitting that thing.
Eventually it's going to learn to strike you before it gets struck.
Eventually it's going to catch the stick and hit you back.
That's the trap right there, that we put living agency to things we create. And the problem is that thing will only ever learn how to get better at not getting tripped.
Indeed.
And that's eventually it may learn to dodge the oncoming trip, but it's always reactionary. It's not forward thinking. If it became forward thinking, then it would be more consciousness than reactionary.
Yes.
And that's where actually we differentiate from everything else in the animal kingdom, is that we have the forward thinking brain, and we can make predictive models to say that that's a very bad idea to happen and avoid said getting tripped. I actually saw a few other videos of Boston Robotics. They wanted to put their rovers and that on the moon, but they weren't, or not the moon, but the Mars rover. They were one of the contenders to put their robotics on there, but they didn't have the learning algorithms ready yet for them to just launch this big old bulky thing over there, so it could just get anywhere and go faster than the rover, and then do analysis and all that on top of it. Mm-hmm. But I remember they had one that was it looked like a dog. It was like four-legged, and they go up and just kick that thing as hard as it. You watch them walk up and just kick it to the side, and it'd fall over, and then it'd shriek and get itself back up and just keep walking around like nothing happened. And I was like, you just kicked a dog, dude. That's not very cool. I kept on thinking that every time you watch it, you just watch him, you run up. He gets a good one step in, so you got the hip throw into it too, and you're like, oh man, that's mean. And it just falls over, gets back up, starts walking like nothing happened. I'm like, wait a second, that's AI. But at the same time, what if it learned to attack? It's just be weird.
There's the other question: if it's a self-learning algorithm, at which point does it become morally wrong to kick the self-learning algorithm?
Right. You just they made it look like a dog, so it's like you just kicked a dog, dude. It's not cool. The thing is they don't have the extrasensory input to determine whether or not they should avoid or defend.
Yeah.
So if they put all that into it, if it was able to gain that without being programmed or without being added by a human, then it could get reactionary. It could get pre-planning. It could know that this guy always hides around a corner ready to kick me over. And so it steps out, lets him kick, steps back, and then trots over him and laughs or something,
Mm-hmm.
It would be It'd be pretty close, but that's the only thing about computers is they don't have their own mechanisms to evolve. We have to evolve for them.
Yes, unless you, as you say, you consider those self-writing software or the algorithms that are able to add additional components to their own algorithms and write their own software, which is a current feature. And I'm interested in the analogy that you made to the documentary about the story of life, because in many ways, um, current AIs seem analogous to a newborn baby to me. So, as Seamus says, maybe it's not the same moral question. You don't have the same moral duty to an AI today that you do to a baby. But when you
Yeah.
describe the big end-to-end picture, uh, the current artificial intelligences that we have at the minute sound very much like babies. As you say, that they really don't know very much, but they have the capacity to learn. It's just, I mean, maybe they're going to take 100 years instead of 50 years, or maybe they'll take 200 years. But still, that doesn't change the moral calculus very much. Or, as Sam Harris pointed out in his last TED talk, it doesn't change the urgency very much. So I think a lot of the AI researchers will say something like 50 to 100 years before we have an artificial intelligence. So let's be conservative and double that and say it's 200 years for the sake of argument. Let's say it's 200 years before we make an artificial intelligence, and the software and the internet is only a few decades old. So look how far we've come in a couple of decades. How much further will be ahead in 200 years from now? So let's say we had an artificial intelligence in 200 years, and as Sam Harris pointed out, if we received a message from an extraterrestrial species that says something to the effect of, we're much smarter than you and we'll be on Earth in about 200 years from now, you would immediately have every government in the world making this their top priority. How do we
Yeah, they would.
prepare?
That would actually, I think, that's one of the few things I like about the apocalyptic movies, is that they always, global catastrophe challenged by aliens or whatever, always seems to unite humanity against a common enemy. And I'm like, sadly, we're very tribal, but that's exactly what would happen.
Yes.
It'd be horrible to say, but, Russia and U.S. would be like, dude, let's get together and blow these assholes away. And Putin would be like, sure. Let's do it. It would immediately unite us.
Yes, but
that's a horrible way to unite, I think. But yeah,
indeed. But the paradox is, if you have a potential homegrown disaster, whether it's climate change or artificial intelligence, then even if you give yourself a 200-year horizon, the reaction largely seems to be meh.
Yeah, exactly. It'd have to be immediate, and we'd have to be spanked. Like Independence Day, for example, was one good example where they're using old Morse code lines and all that, and all of a sudden, we found a way to finally defeat them by shoving an airplane up their tailpipe, essentially.
I hated that film.
Banana in the tailpipe kills him. Oh, I hated it for a couple of reasons. Like the programming of the virus. I'm like, dude.
Thank you.
You're saying you can't do that. You don't even. It would take you years to decrypt their software, let alone write a virus that does that.
Is this the first one or the second one?
The first one.
First one.
So basically, it would be like if we're attacking Germany now and we're driving a 1930s or 1910 car, that's supposed to be, one of theirs, right? Hi, guys. Hi. Yeah, we're with you, right? Nobody's going to think that that's awkward. Right into the heart of it, and then suddenly our software language is going to map up with their software language, and just, my head hurt that whole sequence. I'm just like, no.
Yeah, not even possible, but as I always tell my wife and everybody else that nitpicks a movie like that, is it's in the script. Shut up. Let's go.
Yeah, that's right.
They need a way to win. It's in
Shit,
the
they got
script.
Windows 10. All right, we're good.
There was another movie that was like that. It wasn't Interstellar. What was the other one? It was another space movie where all the physicists were like, no, that's not what would happen.
Star Wars.
And it wasn't Star Wars. I actually enjoyed that one. But the size of the sun and that the planet around it was like, yeah, that's off, but whatever.
There was Sandra Bullock and George Clooney.
Gravity.
Yeah, all the scientists from NASA were complaining because I think they had all of the satellites and the space station and the shuttle all at orbits at the same altitude, so that if one had a problem, they all bump into each other. Whereas they're all at very, very different altitudes, so it wasn't at all realistic, unfortunately. But I don't know. Sometimes you can tell when things aren't at all realistic, and it's still a decent movie. But I didn't like that movie.
I didn't like that one either. It was Gravity was the name of that one.
That's right.
It was horrible. Okay, so no, the one I was thinking about was Lucy, where the 10%, the 10% of your brain thing, and like the neuroscientists and the psychologists and that was like, yeah, that's not true. And so I was reading a whole bunch of memes on some of the private blogs and stuff, and they're like, what are you doing this weekend? Nitpicking? And they go watch that movie like, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. When you get higher level consciousness, you don't suddenly get to remanipulate matter because your brain is higher cognitive. It's not true. You're already using 100% of your brain. You just don't realize it. Try solving problems and looking yourself up on an MRI. It'll be fun. It's old world thinking. It was just annoying.
I think that there's a specific origin of that 10% figure, isn't there? Some neuroscientist at some point said your conscious mind is just 10% of your brain and 90% is your unconscious. And what he really meant was, when we're talking now, there's sound waves coming from the speaker in these earpieces, and I'm not consciously trying to translate these sound waves into verbs and nouns when you guys are talking. There's some unconscious process in my brain that's doing all that, and the language just filters up into my consciousness. And someone described the conscious brain as about 10% of the brain function, and the unconscious is 90%. And a bunch of journalists just jumped to the conclusion that we're only really using 10% of our brain.
I remember that. I remember that trying to make. Yeah, I remember it really being popular, like in the '80s and like early '90s, is something to push. I remember even being in, I can't remember if it was junior high school or, I think it was junior high school. That one of my science teachers, actually, which is scary now you think about it, was trying to say that, I guess, and he named a scientist that actually had said this too, so it wasn't like he was pulling it totally out of his ass, saying that, they estimate that Michael Jordan is using 2% more of his brain than other people, but it's for athletics, because if you notice, he's able to leap higher than other people, and I'm thinking, well, it's because nobody calls him for traveling. He gets a running start. Come on.
Right. There's an article from 2008 about the 10% myth in Scientific American.
And the Scientific American explicitly calls it a myth, Glenn?
Yeah, they do.
That's good.
Let's see, where did it come from? There's no definitive culprit, it says. But it started with American psychologist William James.
What, does it give a year?
It doesn't give a date, though. That's what sucks. I was hoping for a date out of that. But no, I knew it was in the 60s and 70s before MRIs and EKGs and EEGs and all that were invented. So we had no way to actually effectively measure how much of the brain we're actually using or not. And once the EEG and the EKG were invented, we're like, oh, wow, no, we're using a lot more. The whole thing, in fact. And they had since shifted that, but then, you know, Hollywood got a hold of it. And then we had movies that proclaim that you use more of your brain and you have superpowers of psychology or telekinesis or levitation, or you get mutations that give you superpowers that tap into other people's minds and stuff.
Okay,
I was like,
me being the less informed or converted determinist here. Let me, since we're talking about the specific brain, all right, and things that I like to watch for entertainment value, no more or less, is Ancient Alien sometimes, and I know John's familiar with it. I'm sure you probably are. And this has not only been on there, but it's been on other, you know, shows about Einstein's brain. I forget which lobe he had that was abnormal or considered to be extra large compared to other brains.
Yeah, it's prefrontal.
Okay, so does that play into this as a role at all? You know, I mean, if the three of us right now, if, you know, somebody removed our brains, are we all going to be pretty much exact copies of the other, or is there a biological thumbprint, if you will, of our brains? You know, are they uniquely designed, so to speak?
I wouldn't put designed in there.
Sorry. Not what I meant, but I think it's what I meant.
I know what you meant. I just any creationist watching this, that was a misspeak.
Yes, thank you.
They have evolved, and we're just as our thumbprints are different. Our brains are too. In fact, our physiology from our parents give it a very kind of set construct, but the problem is once we develop, learn, evolve, experience our environment, change our environment, say we move to a different country, different area, different region, that affects our physiology. It affects our brains as well. It changes our neurology down to a root level. The extent of that, still unknown. It's kind of new science area, and the only way to really kind of explore that is wait until you're dead, take your brain out, and explore it, unfortunately, because we don't have the method or madness to...
So the experience factor, would it be on par, maybe I'm making a horrible analogy, but I play guitar, as John knows, and a lot of other people do. I've been playing since I don't know, 15, 14, somewhere in there. You know, comparing my fingers to other people's, I have, you know, built up callus over time. Or if you start walking outside without shoes, you're going to have the same, you know, issue with your feet. Would that be on par for the experiences and the changes in our formats in our brains from, okay.
So it's very similar. The difference is our physiology will adapt faster than our brains do, unfortunately. Our forward-thinking little minds determine that we can pretty much solve any problem, doesn't matter where we're at. And that's why you have tribes that were nomadic, that would just travel around. A lot of the Native American ones would know where to go, but they'd also change their course a little bit and maybe go a little bit north or south, depending on how things were growing in certain areas, so they'd always know they'd have food depending on where they go. So they could change their patterns and develop a pattern-seeking brain, basically, is what determines differently. But, for example, I grew up in Utah for the last 35 years of my life, and moving to Texas has changed my perceptions a little bit because it's now flatland, for example. And so getting my bearings, that alone is a cognitive thing. You know where to look because you can orient yourself based on the mountain range. This mountain range is always to the east, and this one's always to the west. The Great Salt Lake is always to the north of where you're at, unless you're above the Great Salt Lake, and you can orient yourself based on your geography. Well, when there is none, you have to change that mode of thinking, and it takes some time to adapt. And that's not physiological; that's neurological. So there's a cross somewhere in between there. Where that cross is depends, but it's always slower than your body. Your body will adapt to your surroundings faster than your mind will. And it's only because your mind goes into survival mode because you're in a new environment. So it kind of shuts down that and just focuses on the lower needs of shelter, survival, whatnot. And once all that's secured, then you're like, yeah, and then you started adapting after that.
How's it going from Mormon land to Texas?
I get that asked so many times.
I'm sure.
And the other thing I always get asked is, were you Mormon? I'm like, no. I actually did go to church. I actually held the priesthood, but it was so I could get dates. And at the time, I was married to a Mormon, so doing that was culturally appropriate, I guess you could say. So it kind of went with it just to have people leave me the hell alone.
Mormon girls easy?
Yes and no. It's just like dating the pastor's daughter.
Right.
She's kind of a freak. Same thing.
Yeah. All right.
Except they're all like that. They're very...
So a road trip, is that what you're saying? No.
Well, here's the problem with that, and I would recommend against it, actually.
Yeah.
In their religion, they make women codependent upon men.
Yeah.
Completely. Psychologically codependent. So if you start dating one... Actually, I had a guy that I live next to from New York, and he came up to me one day, and he was like, dude, if you see this blonde chick out here parked in her car, could you tell her to just call the cops or something? I'm like, why? And he's like, I hooked up with her. And I said, I'm not interested. And it just was a one-night thing. And she's like totally just stalking me now. And it's because that's when I kind of realized I started watching the behavior patterns of all my friends and all the girls that I knew and all that. And they're extremely codependent in their environment. And I tried to trace it back. And the only thing I could think of is all these girls grew up in a Mormon society. And in Mormon society, you can't even enter heaven unless your husband calls your secret name behind the gates. And I'm like, that might be it. You just created a codependent society that makes the women entirely reliant upon men. It also explains the polygamy. Like if you have the women believe that you're burning in hell unless a man calls your name on the other side and the men are limited, you flock like a buck claiming his right to breed all the women type thing in the elk society or something. It's very similar. And I'm like, but you made it religious. That's horrible.
So you're neurologically wired to hook up with Mormons, Glenn, and now you're going to have to change your brain neurology to hook up with Baptists and Methodists and Presbyterians or whatever.
No, actually, what I did was back then I started thinking. I've always been analytical, so I noticed this after I divorced my ex, and I was like, yeah, this whole situation doesn't work. So I drew a list of things. I analyzed it, like quantified what does not work and why. And I noticed that the things that don't work in Utah is no girls whose name starts with an A, which is a little bit superstitious, but there's a lot of A names, and the A names are associated with Mormon families for some reason. Okay. That had, like, it just, every single time I'd noticed that's exactly what it is. So if I dated an Amanda, and I go back, her parents were Mormon, her grandparents are Mormon. They came back and they go to Pioneer Days, as they call it, which is the Mormons that went across the trail. They celebrate those people that survived, essentially. And so I noticed that. So no A names was on my list, and no girls in the bar, because I noticed that the only reason they're in the bar is because there's more drama there than in the relationships, and they're always codependent. And so it was just horrible people there. They're not looking for, just a good night out. They're there for the drama. Right. It was like going to a soap opera if you went to the bar there. It was really, really bad.
Well, how about... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, the third thing on my list was no one from Utah. And I put that on there because it was like, none of this works. And these women are all codependent. I haven't met one in Utah that isn't self-sufficient, self-reliant, independent. They all codependent. It's retarded. So... I started listening to things I like instead. I was like, well, I like Asians. That works for me. I like people not from Utah. I like people with a level head. And I ended up marrying my wife, and we've been married for 15 years 2 weeks ago, or 14
Awesome.
years 2 weeks ago. And she's Filipino. She's off the boat. She was born in the Philippines. She's from New Orleans, not from Utah. She's in Utah with her mom because her sisters convinced her that mom needs somebody to live with her because she can't be by herself. She can't be trusted, which ended up working. So, I don't Yeah, I came down here and it was a different world entirely when it came to religious aspects. But it was, yeah, Utah. It's like Little Rome, and I often equate it to Children of the Corn. You can't get much more programmed than that. It's pretty creepy. Like if you go there, everybody's like, "I love the country. It's so beautiful there. The mountains are great. The skiing's awesome." Like, did you talk to anybody? No, not really. Yeah, then I can see why you like it. Especially, see, down in the South, there's a lot of more darker skinned people because it's more comfortable for them down here, right? In Utah, I knew all 3 black people. Yeah. There was only 3 of them, but it's because it's always cold in their skin, and they're not adaptive to that environment as much, so it's more comfortable for them down here. But
plus, the Mormonism kind of ostracized them pretty heavily early on.
Yeah, well, if you ever read the Book of Mormon, like you can't get through the first book. You know, they do the same thing with Psalms and Leviticus and all that stuff.
Yeah. It wasn't until like the late 70s, early 80s before they were even allowed to be a member of the church or even be around other Mormons or something.
It was the year I was born, 1978.
Okay.
And they were finally allowed the priesthood, and the only reason they were allowed the conspiracy theory among the Mormons is the only reason that they allowed the priesthood to anybody with dark skin is because if they didn't, then the Civil Liberties Union and the Civil Rights Movement and the federal government were going to take away their tax-exempt status and sue the living crap out of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so it's like, lose my tax-exempt status as a multi-billion-dollar industry / church.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just let them in.
Yeah.
But then they segregate them. It's hilarious. Like they do that, and then like this, there's a lot of Samoans in Utah for some reason. A lot of Pacific Islanders.
Didn't know that.
But they have their own churches. They don't go to everybody else's church. It's all white church and then Samoan church. They have their own little thing. But there's also a church every neighborhood. Every neighborhood has a Mormon church. Every school has a what they call a seminary building across the street. Junior high and high schools have a seminary building that they give a free period to and allow kids to go to church during the middle of the school. Wow. I hate Utah.
So let me ask you guys this theory, and it's going to be fun since you guys are both married. I could put you guys on the spot a bit. Hashtag don't let your spouses watch this. I don't know. I'm sure it wasn't Cenk Uygur that actually came up with this theory, but he's the first person or last person I remember saying it. That the theory is that men are as humans, males are hardwired as a species that every 4 years we get with a woman. Our mating period with them is 4 years, because within the 4 years we build the bond, we mate, we make sure that the offspring is fine, and we move on to the next. Is that a fair assumption or a fair guess? I know I'm.
I'll let you go first.
It doesn't work for me, largely due to laziness. So the whole process of going out to a bar or a restaurant or some other location and going to the effort to be sociable long enough for someone to put up with me just seems like too much hard work to have to do every 4 years.
That's an interesting theory to say. Like, I was actually reading in that same article, bring it back to the beginning, when I was talking about the article that I used to respond to the SJW craziness. There was a claim in evolutionary psychology that men have a propensity to be with multiple women, and the reason they do is because we can impregnate multiple women. A woman can only get pregnant like a week or two out of every month, according to their own physiology. That's just the way they are, right? But men, no, we can knock up 50 women in the same week if we wanted to. So there is a propensity for us to have multiple mates. However, I disagree with Cenk's theory, mainly because he's an idiot. But aside from that, The
This is the guy
the
from the Young
ritual
Turks.
bonds that we have, yeah. Jake, as he's been dubbed by many people on YouTube as the Big Brown Buffalo. If you watch Atheism is Unstoppable, he's the one that coined that phrase actually, and he has pictures. He made a T-shirt with Jake's face on a buffalo and called it. It was just horrible.
Yeah, okay. Now that as I saw that T-shirt, I do watch the Young Turks, and he actually has worn that shirt on there, and I had no idea why. So now I know.
It's from Atheism is Unstoppable because he feels like trolls are giving him an attitude or something, and it's just like. He's an SJW, so I really don't care for his opinions all that much. But anyways, the theory holds that might be true if you have a propensity to seek out multiple mates and really don't care to substantiate a long-lasting relationship. So if you're a more carnal person, I guess you could say that would make sense. But this might get into the nurture versus nature subject a little bit, and this is where it kind of crosses. But we have a propensity to want to protect our children as well. And I would analogize it to similar to the way the lion takes over the den, and they make sure that all their kids raise and get all full adults. But then, in the lion's den, the younger virile male would take over the den and kill all the kids. And they do that because they think those kids are weak from the previous dads, so they murder them all and eat them, I guess. And then all the women have new kids, and that's just the way their thing is.
Much like we want to have heirs of our own, right?
Exactly. So in that sense, we're more like primates. If you look at the primate species, they don't actually go off and kill all the kids of the previous troop leader. As far as I know, I've not seen any documentary that says that. Only lions do that, as far as I've seen. But in a monkey troop or primate troop, the leader of the troop will always make sure that all the kids raise up. The eldest is the leader until they die of natural causes or killed by protecting their troop or whatever. And then the younger ones usually take up the slack, but we have a more propensity to see our kids fully develop than we do every 4 years go out and just seek a new mate. And we have that potential, but it doesn't mean that we have the drive for it. So it's more that he just wants to be a player, I think. And so that's his way of justifying it than actually following what nature versus nurture shows us in other species that are similar to our own. So I can see where he's coming from, but I think it's a little bit off just because he takes what he likes and spits out the rest.
Well, yeah. And that's a whole other podcast we could do, I'm sure. Then us being atheists, okay, would you say then, to throw a carrot, I guess, to the folks that wrote the holy text of religion, that is it so much that they were misogynistic, or that were they just hardwired to be misogynistic in that sense? You want to? I mean, as far as not to the extreme that we know that they've gone, that a lot of, and I've heard a lot of people assert this. Please tell me if I'm wrong. And yes, I am pro-feminist to the non-extreme. Just to paraphrase before I get into all this, right? But that being said, there is the idea that men are supposed to be the dominant and female are supposed to be the subservient. Is that true within nature? Is that something that we could say that if we have primate brain and conscious and all that development, that was just something that was internalized with us, carried forward, and that's part of the origin of the misogynistic extreme that the religious folk went to when they wrote all these books? Or am I over characterizing it?
And by that I mean all religious books,
Well,
because I don't see one that actually goes misandrous that I've
Yeah.
seen yet. I've read there's a website called what was it? I'll have to sacredtext.com, and it has like literally every religious book ever written, in its original language too. If you really feel like reading the Quran in original Arabic and then
if
underpin
there
translation.
is a religion that has women as a hierarchy, I'm sure all the masochistic males will run for that. Okay, so I'm sure we'll give a thumbs up to that. But
We have that religion now, actually, as I'm going to call it.
okay,
But no, actually, I have a theory to that, and
Okay.
I don't know that I can quantify it or qualify it yet. I want to structure it someday and maybe write a paper on it. But what I wrote this in my book, that what I've noticed is all religions have tried to answer things that we don't know, and they did it poorly, but they tried at least. It was at least our initial try to describe the things we saw. For example, we didn't exactly know how floods happened or why they were so disastrous or why people survived. So they made this big old story about Noah flooding everything, and he protected animals, and that's why animals come back, and the rainbow at the end. They didn't know how a rainbow was caused, so they made a story that gave an explanation. So in religion, they also tried to explain psychology, because they've noticed that males have a propensity to protect women. Women have a propensity to be more feeling versus analytical. That's why they're more atheists are men, because we're more analytical than women. Women are more feeling, that type of thing. But what I've noticed is they've also tried to explain this particular dynamic of the male-female relationship. And so they assumed that because men tend to want to lead, take charge, be in the front of everything, put themselves in danger at times, is because it was preordained or it was destined. They gave an explanation. It depends on how you want to look at it. Brahma made man first because they're the stronger one, or Abraham or God made Adam first and women from the rib, because women are shorter apparently, and we have one less rib than women. But there you go. So you get some weird, bizarre explanations. It's something that was just primal instinct that men are programmed to be. Not to say that that's actually 100% accurate, because over the last 2,000 years, we've taken ourselves off the food chain. So that whole development of evolution, where we've been wired to want to be protectors and women are wired to be more nurturing, we're physiologically stronger, so we take those roles because it's more dangerous. And women don't, because they're not physiologically stronger. But since we changed, we took ourselves out of the food chain and took ourselves out of the element, the whole thought process has changed. So what they did to try to maintain status quo, men staying in charge, is they made shit up. Then they put it together. And it became religion, it became law, because God said. So it was an attempt to explain something that happened in nature, and then a failure to realize it's a bunch of bullshit. And so it maintains itself. Unfortunately, it was an original attempt to explain it, and then they made it into law, so it made it the way things need to be. And it's not the way things need to be, because there's plenty of women that are just as intelligent as every man. In fact, more intelligent in many respects, because they think differently than we do. And it's just, that's a fact, that they think differently than we do. It's just that they tried to explain something they didn't understand and missed the boat, essentially. They're close. But at least that's the way I see it.
John?
Yes, well, there's also the I believe it's called the naturalistic fallacy, that says even if it's true that a certain kind of behavior is natural or is the result of evolution, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good. It doesn't necessarily
Right.
mean it's moral or ethical or that's what we should do today. So there's nothing more natural than rape, for example, but I don't think anyone would argue that rape is a good thing. And
Right.
there's lots of things that are the result of evolution. I think Glenn, you probably know better than me. Isn't there evidence that xenophobia, for example, and in-group and out-group thinking has a evolutionary basis? So most people would think that those are not necessarily good ideas, but they do have an evolutionary rationale, as I understand it.
Yeah, they do. That's xenophobia and outgrouping is a natural response because we were once tribes.
Yeah.
We're now global. We're like a six species, and when all that stuff was made up, it was maybe 5 million people on Earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we actually wrote it down, I should say, it was 5 million people on Earth. So if you saw somebody from another tribe, your instant response was, who are they? What are they doing here? And if they come any closer, I'm going to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is our stuff, and we need it to survive, and you come any closer and try to take our stuff, we will kill you. And that was the response. And so if anybody that didn't look like them or anybody that didn't look familiar to the tribe was instantly like outcast, ostracized. It sometimes develop, people bring people in, people connect tribes. I think the earliest evidence of that was in Hindu beliefs, that the Hindu religion itself is a collection of the multiple tribes' belief systems all meshed into one, which is why they have multiple gods, multiple beliefs.
Okay.
And so they kind of crammed everything together. And so the intertribal relationships started there probably better than, say, Central Europe, where we had a clear skin tone difference between Africa and Northern Europe, Scandinavia. And so that clear difference drove us to act and behave the way we do. Mm-hmm. Actually, we still act like that in some cases. There's always outgrouping, but now it's more not so much about the skin, even though the recent movements make it about the skin, but more about the way you think. Mm-hmm. Because even in those groups, they out people that don't think like they do.
Yeah.
Which is
absolutely
stupid. So we have that propensity, and we also have the ability to overcome it, which is dumb. I mean, you would think if it's a hindrance, you get rid of it. I mean, it's not helping you, so toss it out. But some people don't. They wholeheartedly adopt it, and instead of being it about survival and making sure that my tribe survives versus your tribe, it's all about I'm right and you're wrong, which is not exactly helpful.
Yes, so we're back to where we started, I guess, in terms of whether ideas are religious or secular. The suggestion that we have lots of faith-based ideas, whether that's faith in a particular religion or faith in the unregulated free market or in communism or in lots of the populist ideas that have been coming to the fore in various countries, I guess. So there's just because it's popular doesn't necessarily mean it's right. So interesting stuff. And listen, you've been very generous with your time, Glenn. I very much appreciate that. We're well over an hour at this stage, so I'm conscious we shouldn't use up all of your day. But what I'm left thinking is next time we do this, we must do it later so that you can catch up with us. And as well as that, we'll post the podcast along with links to your website and Twitter feed. And is there anywhere else we should link to where people can catch up with your work?
So I've picked up a new platform because Twitter started to police its speech, I guess you could say, where they started blocking accounts that don't agree with leadership of Twitter. And there's a new one out there called Minds.
Okay.
Minds.com.
Must take a look.
I've been on that one a little bit. Like Sergana Vakad is on there, David Cullen, Undoomed. Those are three of the bigger YouTubers that I've seen on there. But I've seen some other people too that are just it's a whole about free market. They built a tool in there where you can boost and promote your posts based on either activity on your own feed, or you can pay them and you can boost it, which is a different model than what YouTube and all that have done.
Okay.
And the rest. So I've been on there maybe the last month or so, just trying it out to see what it's like. It's not too bad actually, but it's also in beta, so it's not exactly full release yet.
Okay.
But it's not too bad of a platform for now, anyways.
Very good. So yes, you should send those links through to us, and we'll post that along with the blog post.
Sure.
So listen, it's been a lot of fun, and thanks a lot for your time. You've been very good to us today. That's very much appreciated, and we should do it again sometime, Glenn.
Absolutely. I enjoyed your guys' company. It was very cool.
Great.
And definitely do it again.
Cool. Listen, enjoy the rest of your day, man. I'll talk to you again soon.
Good talking to you. Take care.
Yeah.
All the
You
best.
too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, that's fun.
Yes. So I think that was quite a bit longer than our last discussion with Dr. G, but Glenn's a well-read guy. I'm not too sure I would agree with everything that Glenn says. I doubt he would agree with everything that I have to say on
Right. Same
artificial intelligence and other issues too. But he's got an interesting background, hasn't he? From Utah to Texas.
Yeah, you don't hear too many people come from the land of magic underwear to the Lone Star State very often. So, I should have asked him if he still has a pair of magic underwear, but forgot to.
Bit of an adjustment.
Yeah.
For Glenn, but maybe we'll have him on back again soon, and we can ask him that.
Yeah. Yep. Or go on the Axiom Principle, right? It's his show we were on before, that he treated us very well. So
That's right.
hopefully we can be back on there at some point, talk about
Indeed.
something just as non-important as this. I don't.
Maybe we can submit a question about the magic underwear to his next Axiom Principle podcast.
That's a good idea. Definitely a great idea there. So
Very good.
alrighty. Well, thanks again to our great guest, Dr. Glenn Vickers, for coming on the show. Again, great guy. Be sure to check out his podcast, The Axiom Principle. Whether other links on our blog and YouTube ahead. Please hit subscribe on the button there on YouTube so you can see our future shows. Be sure to check out our webpage, thefreethoughtprophet.com. Follow my dear brother John there on Twitter at JohnHamill151. Myself, Seamus, at TheFTProphet. And until next time, remember, the freedom of thought can only be given away, not taken away. Good night, everybody.
Bye, folks.